Yo guys, what is up? It's the Tominator back with another one, and this time we're going to be doing a rundown of the most genetically gifted bodybuilders of all time. So you hear this expression, good genetics, all the time in bodybuilding, but what does it really mean? Well, it can refer to a lot of things actually. So one aspect of good genetics is having those nice round muscle bellies that really make everything pop like a comic book character. Another would be to have an ideal skeletal structure, a wide set of shoulders on a small waist with tiny joints. And another way is to have really good muscle insertions. So low-hanging lats, for example, are very desirable for a bodybuilder because it helps maximize the V-taper and the total surface area of the lats, allowing for more complete back development. Another thing to consider when we talk about genetics is what did these guys look like in their early years before they jumped on tons of gear? So natural potential is something we definitely got to think about. But on the flip side, your very response to things like steroids and human growth hormone and all that is itself genetic. As we'll see, there's a couple guys on this list that don't look impressive at all when they're off cycle, but then they hop on the juice and go from zero to hero in a matter of months. Best believe this is very rare. Not everybody can make massive transformations like Kevin Levrone. So the extent to which your body responds to training and drugs is actually genetically predetermined to a large extent. And of course, another way to ascertain who is genetically gifted is to really dissect these guys, pick them apart, and figure out who has the least number of weaknesses. That's probably the most logical way to go about it, of separating the best from the rest. So yeah, as you can see, genetically gifted is a very broad and multifaceted term that can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. So this is no easy question to answer. Now, two things I'm not factoring in here are physical strength and contest placings, okay? So guys like Johnny Jackson and Stan Efferding are some of the strongest bodybuilders who ever lived, no question. And that's definitely genetic to a degree like anything else, but it's not really relevant to bodybuilding. It's not going to win you any shows, it doesn't really count. So maybe if we were talking about powerlifting, then sure, but we're not. And as for contest placings, there are several guys on this list who never won a single Olympia, yet I would still firmly maintain that they're more naturally gifted than the guys who were defeating them in competition. It's like what Dorian said when he acknowledged some of his opponents were genetically superior, but he simply outworked them all. So needless to say, there's more factors that go into winning a bodybuilding show than just raw genetics, right? Okay, I just wanted to point out these things so we're all on the same page, but now that that's out of the way, let's get into it. First up at number 10, we have Dexter Jackson. Oh, and one more thing to note is that the order of this list, I admit, is mostly arbitrary. It's hard enough just trying to narrow it down to 10, but then ordering it, I mean, come on, this is so subjective. So try not to get too mad with me if you disagree about some of these rankings. But anyway, I didn't actually have him making this list at all originally. He just kind of missed the cut. But then I recently watched one of his training videos where he mentioned that he doesn't train forearms. They just get pumped like this when he does biceps. And I already knew that he never trained abs, but now you're going to tell me with forearms and a brachioradialis like this that you never even do a set of wrist curls, brah? Like, damn, son. If that's not premier genetics, I don't know what is. Dexter's sick, man. Look at this front double from the 2009 Mr. O and tell me that's not one of the best ever. The arms are damn near the size of his waist, and there's just bubbles all over the place. You want to talk about roundness? This guy brings it like few others ever have. His only real flaws are the high lats, which you can clearly see here, and of course his shitty calves. That's really about it though. The back is great, the shoulders and arms are pretty much perfect, the chest is solid, the upper legs as well. Now it's true at times this guy has been known to come in a little distended, especially in recent years, but that's mostly a result of overeating and drug abuse and mistiming his prep, and not a genetic factor. Because check him out back in the day, that midsection is money, man. It's a picture-perfect six-pack. What more do you want? And he doesn't train abs. Like, how in the is it okay to say I hate this man? And look at this most muscular. Do these forearms look like they've never been trained before? Now, I know he does do hammer curls, but still, that's just God-given shape and proportions. You can train your ass off and take more shit than Boston Lloyd. Good luck looking like this, though. And they don't call him the Blade for nothing. Dexter's always been known for bringing the conditioning. Even in the off-season, he shows more cuts and quality muscle than a lot of his competitors come contest day. In my opinion, he's one of the few pros who actually looks good year-round, unlike most of these fat, bloated water buffaloes when they lumber on stage for a guest posing looking stupid. And a big part of this is his hyper-fast metabolism. Dexter's a classic ectomorph, just a naturally skinny guy, and he claims he loses like 5 pounds whenever he skips a single meal. Hell, I believe him, considering he chows down on burgers and pizza in the off-season and still looks as good as what we just saw. He actually complains about having to eat so much just to maintain his weight. Isn't that a problem many of us would love to have? So for all these reasons, that's why I consider him to be one of the most genetically gifted individuals to ever put on a pair of posing trunks. Next at number 9 is Paul Dillet. Probably the most shapely mass monster in history. A guy with just supernatural proportions. Like, some of these pics you can find of him don't even look real. I mean, this one right here, if I didn't know better, I'd swear this is photoshopped. He looks like a villain straight out of a Marvel comic book. The guy's arms, delts, pecs, abs, even the calves were all just mind-blowing. And what mass monster do you know who can boast a midsection like that? There's perhaps only one other in history to my knowledge, and guess what? He's also on this list, and we'll see him a little later. But as for Dillet, show me another guy of this size who can pull off the crucifix pose. There is nobody, man. This was momentous, guys. Even his legs were huge and perfectly balanced to everything else. And I don't mean to sound racist here, but the fact is that it's a rare sight to see a black bodybuilder with great calves, but Paul was packing serious mass down there too. Here's another pic that makes you question what is humanly possible. But then they didn't call him Freakenstein and Jurassic Paul for nothing though. There's those great calves I was just talking about on full display. Another impressive feature is all the crazy veins snaking through his chest. It's very rare to see that level of vascularity in the pecs, so from the front this guy was unbelievable. In fact, it's been said, even by his fellow competitors, that standing relaxed, Dillet was Mr. Olympia. Nobody else could hang with his shapely mass and proportions. Just look at how he dwarfs Flex Wheeler here. He makes him look like an amateur. Of course, his downfall was always his posing. He was an infamously poor poser, and his inability to effectively hit a pose, let alone hold it for more than a split second or so without shaking like a leaf, that's the main reason he never lived up to all his genetic potential. That and his disappointing back, because from the front he looks sensational. From the back, not so much. Here he is getting ousted by a much shorter and smaller Lee Priest, who himself was never that good in the back department either. But one more thing that has to be said in support of Paul's great genetics is that he never really trained with much intensity. The guy was known for being lazy in the gym, and yet was still able to attain such a freaky level of quality mass, the likes of which you could count the other bodybuilders on his level on one hand. So that's why Dillet makes this list. Coming in at number 8 is the guy standing next to him, Lee Priest. The owner of arguably the very best set of guns in history. The only others who can rival him for that claim are Rolly Winkler and Phil Heath, who both have the distinct advantage of competing in an era where they use a lot more drugs, and so can achieve a level of mass that simply wasn't possible back in Lee's day. But here's a guy who stands only 5'4", yet had the same kind of measurements as dudes who were a full head taller than him. And in addition to the world-class arms, Lee also had an exceptional midsection, not just a 6-pack, but a full-on 8-pack. That's something you certainly don't see every day. The legs as well were really pretty great. Thick, deeply separated quads, a good hamstring sweep, and a big-ass pair of calves to top it off. His only weaknesses, besides his small stature, were his mediocre back and a too small chest. Other than that, he had pretty much the ultimate bodybuilding physique. And who else could go from looking like a fat ass who doesn't even lift to that? No wonder he had that Superman tattoo and necklace. I think this guy really must have had superpowers to make this sort of transformation. Another thing that's worth noting is how impressive he looked even as a kid. Here he is at ages 16, 17, and 20, from left to right respectively, and even as a 16-year-old, he's looking more buff than I do after 15 years of training. I'm not even ashamed to admit that, because let's be honest, that's probably better muscular development than 99% of us will ever achieve in our lifetimes. So whether or not he was using steroids at this time, and I strongly suspect he was, by the way, but it's pretty much irrelevant because you don't just stick a needle in your ass and suddenly look like Lee. This is just incredible, 1 in a million type genetics here. And who else besides Sergio Oliva himself can hit the victory pose this well? I can't think of a single person. Because of his amazing arms and forearms, Lee could pull off rare poses like these that other bodybuilders would frankly look foolish even attempting. I also have to mention that Lee used a minimal amount of drugs to attain his physique. Yes, he did take steroids and even growth hormone in his later years, but his dosages were basically minuscule compared to most of his contemporaries, so that just goes to show how far his great genetics carried him. And lastly, the man they call the blonde myth still looks good today. I'm not crazy about all his tattoos and shit, but you gotta agree that this physique is pretty remarkable for a guy in his 40s. So just like Dexter, he's demonstrated exceptional longevity. Next up at number 7, we have Shawn Ray. Now, personally, as many of you already know, this is my favorite bodybuilder of all time. The reason being, I feel like his shape and proportions and overall development was virtually flawless. I mean, try as you might, you really can't find a bad body part on the guy. Just look at this most muscular, the fullness of the pecs and arms, the washboard abs, all the polished detail. It doesn't get any better if you ask me. It was really easy to find good pics of Ray for this video, I'll tell you that, because he was pretty much never off. He looked great from any angle in almost any pose, and given that he was such an expert poser, he was highly photogenic. The only physical flaws I can think of when it comes to Shawn Ray, because he does have many personality flaws as we all know, but when it comes to criticisms of his physique, they're rather trivial. I've heard people say he was too short and looked kind of stocky, which takes away from his aesthetic appeal, and I can kind of see that, but you have to admit that's a pretty subjective complaint. Another thing people like to knock him for was his width. It's true he definitely wasn't the widest, and he does look downright narrow standing next to Dorian in a lat spread, I'll give you that. But if you look at him in his later years of his career, say in 97 or 98 and onwards, you can see that he definitely made some real progress in the width department and started filling out those lat spreads much better than he did in his earlier days. And Shawn also had some pretty impressive vascularity. Now, usually I find a lot of veiny-ness in a physique to be kind of gross. It's freaky, sure, but it tends to detract from the aesthetics I find. But that's not really the case here. I don't know about you, but this is a body I'd still want to have. He was so often able to achieve that elusive combination of fullness and gritty conditioning that so many guys go their entire careers searching for unsuccessfully. Here he is in 94 next to Dorian. To my eyes, this is close. Not too many people can stand next to Yates in the back double bicep and hold their own, but I think Shawn's doing that here, despite giving up at least a couple dozen pounds to the much larger champion. This is an elite level of total body development and detail that you almost never see, and there's just straight up no way to get it without some world-class genetics, period. Alright, next up we have Kevin Levrone, who was famous for taking most of the year off and only training for like 4 months before the Olympia. So that alone is enough to easily warrant him a spot on this list. Before I get into all his strengths though, let's just briefly mention his weaknesses to see why he's not ranked higher. So number 1 is the back. He was always very wide and had a superb V-taper, but the detail and thickness left a lot to be desired. The biceps also were a little flat and underwhelming compared to his massive triceps and shoulders. His legs were also a notorious weak point for him later on, but I don't dock him for that because earlier in his career he had a crazy set of wheels, so I chalk that up more to injuries and wear and tear than poor genetics. But enough nitpicking, let's talk about what made him so great. For one thing, for a massive guy, he was also aesthetic. Just look at these amazing photo shoot pics here and tell me that you wouldn't want to look like this. I'd go so far as to say that if you don't appreciate this, then you're not a true fan of bodybuilding, because this is pretty much as good as it gets. And Levrone was the unofficial champ at several poses, the side chest being one of them. He just gets it so right. Probably the best side chest in history. No disrespect to Arnold or Ronnie, but this is just immaculate. Also the hands clasped most muscular, he totally owned it. You just don't want to try going up against those triceps, shoulders, and traps in a pose like this. Unless maybe your name is Phil Heath, but otherwise you're getting smoked. Check the quad sweep too, man, just awesome. Oh, and speaking of Phil, Kevin was the original poster boy for that 3D look, by the way. Those round boulder delts and tricep sweeps were truly second to none. And he also put his stamp on the twisting back double bicep. They really ought to consider remaking the Olympia trophy in this very image, because this is pretty much the pinnacle that all bodybuilders should strive for, if you ask me. Never mind that Eugene Sandow character. This is modern bodybuilding at its finest. Yeah, and another thing is that not only was he able to get ready for the Olympia in record time, but he also came in just massive. Aside from a couple other guys on this list that we'll see in a moment, who else responds to gear as well as this man? Because let's be honest, as we saw at the beginning of the video, he's not too impressive when you see him off cycle, but put him on steroids for a couple of months and he just becomes this beastly behemoth. So like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, that's genetic too, guys. Make no mistake about it. Alright guys, I wasn't planning on doing this, but this video is already getting kind of long and we still have the top 5 to go through along with a bunch of honorable mentions, so in the interest of keeping this short and sweet, I'm going to break it up into 2 parts, so thanks for watching this one, guys. Don't worry, the script's already written for the top 5, so that should be coming out real soon, so stay tuned for that, and let me know in the comments below who you think's going to be in there. But thanks for watching, everybody. You know the deal. Feel free to leave a like and subscribe for more if you enjoyed. And until next time, players, I'm the Tominator signing off, and I'll be back.